begin session 4, which is the last session of today, Technology, Conservation, and the Future. And our first presenter is Emily Klipp, and she will be presenting What Else Can I Do with Topobathymetric Data? Topobathymetric Data, excuse me. And we have her on the line. Hi, Emily.
Hi, how are you?
We are fine. We're so glad you could join us.
Glad to be here.
And your PowerPoint is up and ready to go, so I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Sounds good. Thank you so much. All right. Hello, and it's a pleasure to be speaking here today. I'm Emily Klipp. I'm a project manager and have been with Dewberry for over 7 years now. However, I've been working with Topobathymetric LiDAR for almost 15. And today I'm going to talk to you about a variety of applications for Topobathymetric LiDAR. So in terms of what to expect in the presentation, first we'll give a brief overview on just what Topobathymetric LiDAR is and how it differs from terrestrial LiDAR. Next, I'll go over some applications for Topobathymetric LiDAR that pertain to the coast of Florida. And then I'll stick around to answer any questions that you might have. First, let me give a quick introduction to our Topobathy team at Dewberry. I already introduced myself, and I'm here today speaking on behalf of Al Carlin, who many of you likely know. Al's very much wanted to be here today, but had a prior obligation that he just couldn't change. So Al is a senior geospatial scientist on our team at Dewberry and came to us a few years ago after many, many years at SwiftMud. So also on our team is our senior VP, Amar Nayagandhi, our PSM in charge, Keith Patterson, and our LiDAR acquisition and operations manager, Andrew Erickson. So as you may know, Dewberry recently purchased 2 LiDAR sensors, a Regal topographic sensor and a seasonal topobathymetric sensor. Really quickly, I just wanted to touch on our topographic system, which is the Regal VQ1560 Mark II-S. This is the 4th generation of the VQ1560, by far the most powerful system yet. Its extreme long range capability allows for collection of the standard QL2 LiDAR, which is 2 points per square meter, at a flying height of 9,000 feet above ground level. And this really is capable of acquiring extremely dense data with higher efficiency because we can fly at these higher elevations. And flying higher allows for more efficient mapping because the higher you get, the bigger the swath size. So you're able to cover more area in less time by doing that. And also it really allows for high density as well, because then you fly lower and you can get that higher, denser data, but still remain within your standard flying heights. The system also has a phase 1 medium format RGB camera integrated, so it can co-acquire imagery with the LiDAR. And then our Topobathy sensor is the Teledyne Geospatial Seasonal Supernova. The system collects data at an average of 8 points per square meter, which is double the density of the previous Nova system. This is a huge improvement because average density for most of the standard Topobathy systems out there is about 3 points per square meter. This system was also built with shallow and deep channels so that it can acquire data deeper than standard Bathy LiDAR systems, but it also is programmable, so it can be optimized in shallow water environments and allow for better collection in more turbid environments. This system, it can penetrate the water column down to about 3.5 secudissteps, where other systems really only go to about 2 secudissteps. And then with Topobathy systems, flying heights do need to be lower than with the topographic systems because the green wavelength of this LiDAR system isn't as strong as near infrared wavelength. But even so, we can still fly at about 1,200 feet above ground level and achieve that 8 points per square meter density, both on land and underwater. And this system also does have that phase 1 medium format RGB camera integrated with it as well. So now, what is Topobathymetric LiDAR and how is it different from terrestrial or topographic LiDAR? You'll likely hear me refer to Topobathy. Same thing as Topobathymetric, just shorter and easier to say. So both Topo and Topobathy LiDAR use the known constant of the speed of light to measure the distance from the sensor mounted on the aircraft down to the ground and reflected light coming back up to give you high accuracy elevation values. Not only are elevation measurements captured, on the ground, but they're also from trees, buildings, other land surfaces, anything that the light hits and reflects off of. And with Topobathy, even underwater surfaces. So topographic LiDAR uses near-infrared light to collect elevation data on land. However, near-infrared can't penetrate the water column. So this is where Topobathy LiDAR comes in with the use of water-penetrating green light to capture these near-shore and shallow water environments. So at a very high level, we can identify three basic differences between topographic and Topobathy LiDAR. The first being the scan pattern of these systems. So the terrestrial LiDAR is generally nadir, looks straight down and uses a zigzag pattern. But the Topobathy LiDAR is slightly angled forward and uses a circular pattern. Second is the topographic LiDAR travels through air, reflects off the ground or other objects, and returns received back to the sensor. But Topobathy LiDAR travels through two different density media, right? Air and water, which necessitates correcting each and every pulse for refraction through the water by applications of Snell's law. And then third, the sensor requires multiple receiving channels to capture returns through the water column, through the surface, water column, water surface, shallow water returns, and deep water returns. The return energy is also highly dependent on water turbidity, bottom reflectivity or albedo, and then also the water surface, so bubbles or white water along the water surface, or even a very flat, smooth water surface can be a little troublesome to get returns off of. And that's another reason that this system does have that forward-looking laser. So now I'll go over a few applications for Topobathy LiDAR that pertain to areas around coastal Florida. Here's a list of some of the applications I'm going to touch on. And first are going to be the coastal and riverine applications. So this, of course, is the Osceola Research Institute use case in the Appalachia Bay area of the Econfina and Osceola rivers. So this is an older study from about 2016. Where a Regal Topobathymetric sensor was used to find paleo channels in the near shore area. Topobathymetric LiDAR were collected and classified and used to construct a land-water interface as well as a digital elevation model. The digital elevation model, which is shown on the lower right for the Econfina channel, compared very well with the geologic reconstruction, which is in the upper left, and really provided additional current detail of the area. It was a great, fun study to work on. And here's a more recent riverine example that was collected in October of last year using our seasonal sensor. This shows data that we acquired for USGS in the Potomac River. So on the left is the seamless Topobathy DEM, a digital elevation model created from the LiDAR data. And on the right is that DEM combined with the RGB imagery to give you a nice image of seamless from topo down to the bottom of the river. And you can see relief on the riverbed there. And then turning our attention from the coast and rivers to more inland areas of the Gulf Coast of Florida, the Topobathymetric LiDAR can reveal details of first and second order springs. So I'll talk about two newer projects flown in 2021 last year. So we acquired Topobathy LiDAR for Gum Slough in February of last year with the seasonal system. This slough is a spring system in Sumter County that feeds into the Withlacoochee River. We recently processed these data and used them to create a seamless Topobathy DEM. So within these data, we discovered head springs that we didn't expect to find, and some of which SwiftMud had not even been able to find on foot yet. So this was just an amazing, very cool project showing what LiDAR can do. And so not only are we getting returns on the ground here, but we're also getting returns through the water column and able to model the bottom of that channel and the springs. We also actively work with various sensor companies to test the performance of their systems. So in May of last year, we worked with Regal USA and flew several test areas using their smaller VQ840 system. One of these areas was Kiva Springs and the downstream reach of the river. These data were used to understand the scope of the VQ840 sensor and its performance in various environments. The resultant data showed great performance in the non-vegetated portions of the spring and the river, but did struggle to penetrate areas where there was heavy vegetation. So it's a nice smaller format system that can be flown on smaller aircraft. It was flown on a helicopter for this use case, but does have its limitations. Next, I'd like to discuss how the use of Topobathymetric LiDAR, as well as sonar and specialized raster processing, was able to help with minimum flows and levels modeling for SwiftMud. We're currently working on a DEM update for the entire Withlacoochee River watershed, and this update will incorporate a variety of data from different sources, sensors, timeframes, to create a refined DEM of the watershed that SwiftMud will then use to support the minimum flows and levels for this river system, which spans 8 counties of Florida. So first, I want to start with the lower Withlacoochee River, where we use multiple data sources to create a seamless merged DEM here. This portion of the river extends from Lake Rousseau down to the mouth of the river at the Gulf of Mexico. Here we can see the existing Topobathy DEM overlaid with the center line of the river in yellow, as well as a substantial creek, which is Bennett's Creek shown in red, and then the remnants of the Cross Florida Barge Canal. To update the DEM, we wanted to first acquire Topobathymetric LiDAR with our seasonal system, which we did in February of last year. We acquired this data at low tide, so the banks of the river would be more exposed, and it also allows us for returns, into the river system at lower elevations. And then after we acquired this data, we quickly processed it so we could determine the areas where we are likely not getting any bottom returns in the river. I'm sure some of you are probably familiar. This river system can be pretty mucky, so we knew we likely would not get returns past that 3.5 secchi depth. So from that, though, we were able to delineate the areas where we didn't get returns and output a polygon that we then use to guide us in our multi-beam collection. And so here we can see the raster that was created from that multi-beam data, which was acquired at high tide. Acquisition at high tide really allowed for full coverage with the boat-based multi-beam system. We also used a remotely operated Z-boat to collect data in 2 of the spillways that are on this portion of the river. And these areas were just too turbid to collect with the LiDAR and too shallow to access with the multi-beam that was mounted on a boat, pontoon boat. So lastly, we used existing point data collected by SwiftMud to fill in the barge canal area, as well as quality level 1 topographic LiDAR from the USGS Florida Peninsular project to allow for denser topo coverage. We merged that with our Topobathymetric LiDAR, our multi-beam, single beam, and we got the final seamless merged digital elevation model that you can see here. So zooming in to the mouth of the river, the majority of this area is straight from the seasonal, is created straight from the seasonal, with exception to the channel of the river, which was the multi-beam data, and everything else is our seasonal topobathy. It's a really great coverage there. And then zooming into another area, this includes the banks and the canals in this area. So these canals up here, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but we're all seasonal data, and then the channel of the river is multi-beam. Our spillway here is single beam, and then the barge canal is the came from the points provided by SwiftMud. So all that merged together into a nice seamless DEM for full coverage. And then an interesting thing here that we found is a hole that measures down to negative 43.5 feet NAVD88. This was captured by the multi-beam, and just for perspective, this area, the banks of the river are about 8 feet. So a pretty distinctive deep hole. Another interesting find. And then in 2019, Dewberry was tasked by SwiftMud to update. So right before our Lower with Lakuchi project, we worked with SwiftMud to update DEM for the Lake Brousseau, which is just adjacent to the Lower with Lakuchi River. And then as part of this project, we conducted a detailed multi-beam survey along the presumed river channel and in the vicinity of the Inglis Lock and Dam. Also, we collected RTK GPS pole soundings to fill in the shallower portions of the lake and combine those with existing data that had been taken in 2008. With these previously provided data and new data that we acquired, we first made 3 different DEMs. One DEM was of the multi-beam sonar data in the river channel, and then the second beam combined all the point data, so our newly acquired RTK GPS points with the single beam points from 2008, and then the third DEM consisted of a topographic DEM that was provided to us that had previously been created from 2017 data. And then these 3 DEMs were merged and smoothed into a continuous surface for modeling. So then moving back to the full watershed, we're incorporating all the data that I just talked about, and then some. There's a few other smaller projects that we've worked on. And then there's also just existing data that's SwiftMud provided. So we're combining all this data and creating this new seamless updated DEM for those minimum flows and levels. We also work with NOAA's shoreline mapping program, for which we've recently completed 2 Topobathy projects. Both of these projects required acquisition of Topobathy LiDAR and high-resolution aerial imagery that we use for shoreline mapping. These data really enable accurate and consistent measurement of the national shoreline and provide us a seamless topobathymetric data product that can be used for various applications within the entire coastal community, some of which I mentioned here today. And here's an example from those data of an area in St. Pete. This is Pinellas Point, which is at the southern tip of St. Pete, just east of the Sunshine Skyway Bridge. So here on the left, you see the ortho imagery that we acquired at 25 centimeters GSD. In the middle is the seamless Topobathy DEM. And not only is it seamless from Topo to Bathy, but we really were able to get full seamless bathymetric coverage in this area of the bay and throughout the bay. We got down to depths of -9 meters NAVD88. So not depths, but elevations of -9 meters NAVD88. And then on the right here is the normalized seabed reflectance intensity raster. And these have a correction performed to the raw intensity values from the Bathy LiDAR returns to account for attenuation due to depth and angle of incidence. These normalized Bathy return intensities will provide the baselines for generating benthic habitat maps in the study areas without the need for rigorous radiometric calibration. This is kind of we've always provided, there's intensity values associated with LiDAR. And for the bathymetric LiDAR, this is kind of something newer that we're able to do to provide that the normalized reflectance. So it gives you a more accurate representation. It takes that depth away and lets you kind of see by removing the water what the intensity would be like if water wasn't a factor here. And then something that we realized we were seeing in multiple LiDAR projects that we were working on, Topobathymetric LiDAR projects, were these oyster farms. So here's an example from data that was acquired for NOAA in Chesapeake Bay. So you can see that there's these oyster farms. So this is imagery on the left and the DIM on the right. So with that in mind, in February of last year, we acquired Topobathymetric LiDAR with the seasonal in 20 sound. And the image here on the left is a minimum elevation coverage raster that's been created just from really quickly uncalibrated, unclassified LiDAR data to just give us a rough overview of the extent of our bathy bottom coverage. Something to note here is because these data haven't been fully processed, the raster does display water surface where there's no bathy bottom returns. And so that's kind of why you see all that striping going on is from, uncalibrated returns. So the calibration kind of moves flight lines together spatially. And then also there's, probably a varying water surface levels, between the different flights that occurred here. So that being said, even though at first glance it really doesn't look like we got a whole lot of bathy returns, there's definitely a lot of water surface going on there. This is, this area has a very mucky bottom, turbid waters most of the time. So we didn't expect to see a whole lot. However, we were able to get bottom returns for 88% of the oyster beds in this area when compared to a shapefile from the 2001 Swanee River Water Management District Estuary Oyster Habitat Mapping Project. That shapefile included 294 delineated oyster beds within this AOI in pink that you see here, which we got coverage on about 258 of those. So that was pretty exciting to see. We weren't necessarily able to get that mucky bottom returns. We still were able to map those oyster beds. Now we have both the Regal and the seasonal Supernova housed in Tampa, so we can easily access anywhere in Florida at any time. It's opening up a whole wide variety of opportunities, which is so exciting. But recently we conducted a few test flights around the Bay Area that span a variety of water systems from springs to spring-fed rivers, lakes, intercoastal waterways, and coastal nearshore areas. And these test flights will prove our proof of concept that we're currently investigating, and hopefully we'll have some results to show here in the next few months. I'd like to acknowledge all of the folks at NOAA, NGS, SwiftMud, Swanee River Water Management District, St. John's River Water Management District, and the state of Florida for entrusting us to acquire and process these data for their programs and projects. And a special thank you to the Osceola River Institute for allowing me to present today. With that, feel free to reach out at any time with any questions or comments, and thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Do we have any questions from the audience for Emily? No questions. Any questions? Oh, hold on.
Okay.
Here we have one. That's Andy.
Hi, Andy Hemmings. I'm curious, you said it early on, but I didn't catch and I'm not good at the translation. What depth are you getting for bathy LiDAR right now? Like, are you confident?
With our seasonal system, we can get, so we get down to 3.5 Secchi disk depths. I don't know if that's a familiar term, but a Secchi disk is, essentially a black and white disk you set in the water, and, however far you can visually see that into the water, well, it's 3.5 times that is the depth that we can get. So in the bay, the examples I was showing you, we were able to get down to not depth, but -9 meters NAV-D88 elevation. So, water surface is 0, give or take, depending on time. But
anyone else present in the audience with questions for Emily? Anybody online? Okay. I'm just curious, Emily, is some of this data that has gone through the water management districts, is it available to the public?
We are wrapping things up now. So there are projects that have been completed and approved and are available. The lower with Lakuchi and Gum Slough are on the final approval stages, so they should be available soon. And then the NOAA data should be available on the Digital Coast. And I can send a link to that if anyone's interested.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Oh, wait, hold on. We have another question from the audience. Don't leave yet.
Okay.
Well, a question came up here, and that is, can you zoom in on a particular area?
What do you mean by zoom in?
I mean, if you were, flying over or looking, and you saw something in particular that looked interesting, could you zoom in on that one item?
Well, so we're mapping data over the whole area, right? So it would be in post-processing of that data that we'll get the same returns regardless. It's full coverage across everything that we're mapping. So, we have the data, whether if we fly over it and capture it, we've got it.
And is this practical? Is there some practical way that if you had something on your property that you felt was under the ground, like an old foundation, but could you use this to try to identify if that was so?
Well, yes and no. It can. So LiDAR has been used a lot to map. The ruins in South America and things like that. So you can get that high detailed elevation to the centimeter level. So any man-made looking raises, bumps in elevation will stick out, and you will be able to see that.
And we have another question in the audience, from the audience.
Lonnie Mann, thanks for your presentation. About the use of your technology with archaeology, for example, Fort Caroline, which has long been rumored to be in the St. John's, but people have looked, haven't found it. Would it have a potential application for something like that?
Oh, certainly. Yeah. Maybe not the topobathymetric, but our topographic, the Regal system is very high density. So, and it's able to get through a lot of the denser vegetation that, we have here in Florida.
This would be a submerged.
So yeah, I think.
This would be a submerged site.
Oh, it's a submerged site. Okay. Yeah. Yes, definitely. So that would be the topobathymetric.
How expensive is the technology?
Yeah. Yeah, as long as there's relief, there's some kind of relief from that, we can certainly map that.
How expensive is the technology?
Really, it's please reach out with an AOI. It really does depend on size and are there other projects that we can combine it with and things of that nature. But I will say now that we do have our own sensor and it is in Tampa, Florida, so we're very centrally located. It makes it a lot easier to get out to those smaller areas and for cost savings as well. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else with a question for Emily? All right. Well, thank you, Emily.
Thank you.